824 of the live chat for May 24th, 2019. So tonight I want to do a report out on a model of negotiation and conflict resolution that emerged from a master's thesis I was supervising as the research director. So this is an officer from the country of Azerbaijan that's attending our school for a year. And his chosen area of interest was seeing if there was a way to improve the ethnic tensions in and around the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, a contentious area filled with tribal, ethnic, religious, family, economic, political, military tensions. It's been the source of a lot of violence and turmoil. And so he wanted to explore to see if there was a possibility that the UN peacekeeping force could come in and create conditions that would allow for a resolution of this tension. So he used the applied professional case study method that we have been developing at the college, which blends the interests and strengths of research with the interest and strengths of professional staff work. And each of those orientations covers some of the problems or weaknesses of the other dimension. And the integration of those two approaches gives us a satisfying product in the end, one that allows us to say that the professional military staff work was informed by academic rigor and incorporated critical thinking, but also provides us a piece of staff work that would satisfy a chief decision maker who wants to make changes in the world based on a professional piece of staff work. In that method, we end up selecting mental models or concept models and processes that would be persuasive to that chief decision maker. Now in this case, one of the models that the officer used was Galton's triangle of violence, which you see on the screen in front of you. So this model argues that there is some threshold where tensions that arise from either this vertex here of cultural violence or from the vertex of structural violence, and you can see that there are a number of different reasons why issues could emerge. But from whichever source of irritation or tension the issue has come to the front, and because of a shortcoming in negotiation skills or resources or time, or can't get the stakeholders together at a negotiation table, one or other or both or all of the stakeholders decide to move into their domain of direct violence, shown here at the apex of the triangle. So there's some threshold line of violence that shows a breakdown of all the efforts at peaceful coexistence. So he conducted a very thorough analysis of the strategic environment and identified stakeholders, their interests and their issues and their assets and concerns, and traced the history, and began to analyze for some of the reasons why it seems that the culturally based approach seemed to find ways of getting to peaceful coexistence among the local peoples. They found ways to accommodate their interests and issues and were able to get along. But because those resolutions were not able to be incorporated into structure or infrastructure in the form of policy or laws or agreements or treaties, official formal treatment, that there was this persistent drift north into the area of direct violence. In many cases, this was caused by external forces that were either trying to apply leverage or were seeking to exploit a situation, or where a very strict power regime um, was was replaced or destroyed or removed, and then in the resulting chaos, this power vacuum, things got spiraled out of control. So it was a very satisfying model, very good analysis, but in the professional discourse that accompanies this applied professional case study method, the committee had a moment of insight and thought about this from a different point of view and said this approach, which was looking at the United Nations peacekeeping force coming in and ensuring that things did not rise to the level of violence, trying to create a zone of separation. So there were many prophylactic type measures that might be used to separate the belligerents into and create a safe zone. And in that physical separation, there might then be allowed the possibility of negotiations since they were not in a direct firefight. This takes effort and time and money and commitments from other nations. It's not always easy. But it's very much a restrictive mindset, one that seeks to control, and where success is defined as the absence of violence. And so we thought out loud, what would happen if we adjusted this model and made an assumption that it were possible to use a growth mindset where we could take a mirror image of this triangle and then put peace at the other apex. And then we recognize that there might be an opportunity to do more than just avoid violence. There might be a way to construct peace if we were open to that possibility. And so one of the things that happens when you build models is that you simplify the world, but you create the opportunity to examine patterns, relationships, actors and agents and forces in an environment. And you can even get some process models in there too. So this is what emerged out of the next hour of our discussion, which we thought was so powerful that we wanted to share it with the world. And so let me see if I can make this larger. You'll be able to follow along on the notes separately, but I want to show this larger so we can see what's going on. So what we did was added a second triangle down here that showed culture and structure and violence up there, but added a magnetic pole to the south that we called peace. And then we said that just as there would be a red line of a threshold for visible violence if things broke down, that there might be some green line, a visible commitment to peaceful resolution, some kind of threshold. And so we said, well, maybe there's a decision point where the stakeholders, as part of their negotiation, might simply decide to vote for violence or vote for peace. And that sort of meant that up until that point, in this gray area, we had a region of uncertainty where negotiations are going on, but the stakeholders had not yet voted to solidify or crystallize their position into either a commitment to violence or peace. And so we represented that as a diamond as a decision point. And then we said that if we had a UN peacekeeping force that could put a damper on violence or reduce the probability of violence, that we might be thereby creating the time and space for an opportunity space where stakeholders could engage and investigate possible agreements, or if negotiations broke down, where tensions could be exacerbated. So we saw this opportunity space surrounded or occupied by stakeholders and maybe mediators was actually a dynamic thing, and that based on how things were going, it could be moving, towards violence or towards peace or oscillating. But until it had crossed that threshold, it was still in this uncertainty space in this gray area. And we observed that there were probably other forces, actors, and agents in that area that were influencing things, like catalysts who were trying to help get to a resolution for peace or actually for violence. Some mediators who might be engaged in formally helping the negotiation but not binding. as opposed to arbitrators. Um, some reporters who are observing and then communicating that out to the world, and maybe just observers who don't have an official capacity, but who might be, um, you know, recording things for private use. We applied a little bit of peace theory, and we said that if you framed topics on this agenda in the negotiation space as issues, then each side, each stakeholder might bring in things that were contentious or that were win-lose or that were sources of friction. But if we conducted interest mapping, we might be able to use common interests to link together stakeholders in some kind of network of potential. And so depending on which of those ways of generating agenda items you use, you might have different possibilities for favorable outcomes. Now we said on the cultural side, we're really talking about the human-centric, social, tribal, private, familial, personal, human um, value systems. On the structure side, we were looking at formal structures of power and governance, law, organizations, legal force, and that you'd have policies and policy writers and administrators, maybe clustered around here, engaged along with maybe neutrals and uncommitted. Whereas near the culture, you might find local power leaders and elders, narrative sense makers who might be interpreting the actions and then contributing to the storying of the culture. You might have other natural forces that were influencing the time and resources available or creating conditions of concern like a humanitarian assistance. And economic forces that describe the potential for economics to make a difference. And that this line between culture and the opportunity space and the structure, that was a choice line that, you know, one side or the other, you start moving towards violence or moving towards peace, and that we viewed this as a choice that could be made by empowered actors and agents. This was not a foregone conclusion what must occur, but that actors and agents with free will and intention have the power to shape their own future if they see a way to do that, and if they have the resources that enable it, and maybe the kind of protective space created by the UN to be able to do that. Another thing that we noticed was that the way in which negotiations are conducted and the outcomes as perceived by all the stakeholders, the sum total of that resolution actually generates energy that comes back and informs all of the cultural dimensions. And that energy and consequences can move to influence in a permanent way policy and infrastructure. So there are ways in which the transactions and their outcomes go to affect these different um, nexuses or nexi of people and institutions. We also notice there might be, you know, belligerents outside of this space trying to pull things into the area of violence because of their own national or organizational interests. And just as there might be allies for peace trying to pull things in this direction. And then the modern world with its viral media adding reinforcing feedback to this little engine of change, this generator of potential. And so that model helped us really get a deeper understanding of the possibilities for improvement and not just leaving that out in the air, that we could see that as a continuum between peace and violence, and gave us a deeper understanding of how that UN peacekeeping mission might actually engage. So these notes kind of cover many of those same ideas in writing, and we saw in Captain Simonian's MMAS, you know, his time series array of the path through this narrow valley between war and peace that Nagorno-Karabakh has traveled, that there have been times when it was in peace and times when it was in direct violence and other times when it was just kind of oscillating, and that we viewed this as a choice that could be made, and that if we understood the dynamics of this particular model and added the specific details that helped us understand these differential equations, this social calculus, that we might be able to shape a strategy of security with the UN, but also with negotiating teams that might help us um, uh, change the outcome of the future and to move it more towards peace. So this is an area that we're very interested in, and we think this model is going to help us at least start with the communication about these ideas. So some other things that emerged from a number of recent MMASs, Military Masters of Arts and Sciences, just some models that help us think about these things, that when you're trying to craft your way out of a problem area, that if you think of it also as an opportunity and you apply some of these principles, well, then you might be able to adopt that growth mindset. So this is sort of a standard way in which we might employ military decision making and military planning and military design thinking to help us develop options for improvements, not just in tactical scenarios, but maybe in other areas of socio-political engagement where military is a part, but maybe not the leader. So we think about the area of operations as that area immediately under our control or operational command, and the things that we ask about that to make sure that we understand the area we're responsible for. Then the area of interest extends around that 3 and 4 dimensions, defined as an area where events occur beyond our control but which have consequences and impacts on our area of operations. So by understanding the broader context of the environment, we can often take more informed policy choices in the area of operations. We explore motivations, why we should act, must act, why we wouldn't act, or reasons not to. We apply different mental models to look through analytical lenses to have a deeper understanding of what's going on. We might consider the available resources, time, and the risk profile and the risks that we see to help us deepen our understanding of the environment. And from that, we might develop courses of action that answer the 5 W's of who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then it talks about the methods we might use to proceed, considering risk, command and control, and how the resources and priority matrix might shape the operation. So we typically would try to develop multiple courses of action and then compare their performance in a number of scenarios. So we might develop some kind of probabilistic range of outcomes based on our scenarios or wargaming or estimating what might occur, and we try to identify the good things and the bad things and look at the rewards and opportunities versus the risks and consequences. And by visiting every domain in this model, we can maybe have a deeper understanding of what's going on and then find ways in which we might be able to move that opportunity space towards peace rather than violence. And so our planning models are more strict and maybe procedural than this, but this sort of captures the different kinds of constructs and concepts that we use to shape our understanding of what is possible and helps us make some decisions. We might apply something like the Harvard Business Review managing uncertainty model to help us distinguish between different states of nature and then the different postures and strategies we might employ based on our assessment of what's going on in the operational environment. That's why that area of interest is so important. And then we might pick on the military side or on the diplomatic side different approaches or that map to the different strategies in the Courtney model. And then we might try to find actions that are always good to take, like no-brainers, some things that are tentative or preemptive that allow us to venture and preserve the right to play by getting first mover advantage and shaping the environment, or going all in on big bets to shape the environment and tip the scales in our favor if we can. And then we might use elements of portfolio risk management principles to find ways to reduce the risk while preserving the opportunities that are available. And then we use this thing called the Vuca Analysis, which helps us understand the real complexity embedded in human socio-technical, socio-political environments. So this is an example of a couple different models that might be in play. One of the things that comes out of our experience in trying to bring peace to the valley, to try to do things at the micro level that might lead to a better future, but which by themselves are not sufficient unto themselves to get it done. So we often are trying to find projects that we might engage in that have the following kinds of characteristics. We've um, sort of determined that if you can find projects that have these qualities, that they are better than other ones. And what we're trying to do in those outcomes for the projects we select is have a if this were a payoff matrix based on the amount of risk we were taking, we would try to have some kind of control measures in place that would limit our risks to certain acceptable levels of pain, but have a natural set of outcomes that looks like they are robust and natural. And then the possibility of a fat right tail where we could actually have things that really scaled and paid off well while controlling the left-hand side of the curve as much as we could. And so things that sort of map to that kind of a outcome histogram, if you will, are things that are fundamental, that deal with basic human needs and concerns, that fall into that HBR model of must-do things that we can't imagine not doing them, that have a relatively low cost to the amount of potential rewards, so that's the possibility of outsized gains, and then absolutely low cost as a percentage of capital that we do have limits. And so even though the reward to risk might be great, if the costs were too high and we can only afford one of them, that might not be the best way to go. So if we can find things that are actually inexpensive and then offer significant rewards based on that low cost, then we would favor that kind of possibility. And so this is what we would call a favorable asymmetric payoff matrix, or payoff results that have positive expectancy that over time we would expect to get better, that we could, that in order to have this kind of risk managed profile, you got to be able to define and then manage to those risks, and that we have reasonable normalish processes, meaning that we're not relying on voodoo or magic to get things done, but that there are reasonable sociological and human political reasons why these things should work for people based on our understanding of human nature and the situation, and then the possibility of large favorable gains. So that's what we mean by a favorable asymmetric payoff model. We'd like things that are scalable, so that if we did pilot programs like in the Cotter model, that if it turned out to work, that we could rapidly ramp it up and then spread it in a wider area to take advantage of the insights of the results. That rapid cycle time, that we want to find out quickly if it's working or not, so that we can make these leverage and scaling decisions. And we want it robust to VUCA, that when we have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, that our strategies still seem to be feasible and robust, even though we could experience significant changes to the environment. So those tend to be the kinds of projects that we are looking for. We might use a stakeholder model in greater detail like this one, which says if we could identify all of these things about our stakeholders and develop these profiles, that we might be able to have a safe, controlled space where primary stakeholders who must be there were arrayed around the table, maybe with a mediator or a guide, or a master of ceremonies, and then supported by other people who aren't at the table but who do get a vote because they're on the side of justice and positive values, that maybe we exclude these red bad agents, and maybe so we have to have some kind of boundary and gatekeeper function to prevent them from sabotaging. But we might need that barrier to be somewhat permeable, so potential neutrals or favorables could be added in if it turns out that circumstances warrant it. And then we realize that even that setting has an additional environmental layer, but people who are not interested or concerned at all or may not even know. So this multi-layered approach to stakeholder analysis based on these elements of a stakeholder profile might help us develop the kind of understanding we need to be able to craft those courses of action that could lead to value. And then once we can pick those courses of action and develop those projects and resource them, we might align them along certain lines of operation that support broad themes to bring peace to the valley. And so we could do some kind of project management approach based on short, medium, and long term, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 6 months, etc., where we can actually track progress and assess the things that are working both at the tactical level, the operational level, and the strategic level to see if we're making progress on all fronts. So this is the promise of strategic and operational planning, that we can actually do better than random chance and maybe the blind evolution, and hope that in fact maybe we can do things that select better better projects or create better conditions for accelerated success. So that was a quick overview of some of the things that emerged out of this particular model. The most recent thing that we're really proud of and excited by is this model here, which the Simonian dynamic choice model, which really gives us a visual display of what we mean and what we think about the kinds of opportunities we see in the world to help shape environments towards peace rather than violence. We're looking to add this maybe to our doctrinal discussions and try to add some experience. I know already, having shared this with Dr. David Boji, one of the great master storytellers on the planet, that we can expand this idea of the environment, natural forces, to we're considering it maybe as a three-dimensional sphere that provides nurture and support, but might also be at risk if we have bad consequences coming out of these opportunity spaces. So a broader sense of the natural forces and the environment as a supporting almost a cocoon or a shell that provides nourishment and potential for us is some areas in where this model may be further developed. So that's everything I wanted to say about this particular model, and would be interested in any feedback that you have about it. You can see, you can download the ideas there and maybe read through the documentation. And then I would be open to any other discussions for you. I wanted to share this with you because this is the kind of work that our DM program actually supports, the ability to integrate concepts and models and processes from different disciplines and make sense of them in local contexts as a way to improve the local situation. So there's a very strong element of action research principles and practice at work here, as well as the case studies and mixed methods research. And so acting as a catalyst or as a facilitator, this is the kind of work that you could find yourself doing. And you can see, I think, from this one, how these tactical operations that happen here might be part of a strategic alignment plan and could be codified in a strategic vision that talks about the ways ahead and the basic approaches that different stakeholders might want to engage in. And that's why this kind of belongs in our discussions of in this class about strategy and strategic alignment and implementation and the use of mental models to help guide our thinking.